I actually think I'm more interested in what Angela Rayner had to say, that the vast majority of farmers won't be affected, because there's a discrepancy between what DEFRA say and what the Treasury say. DEFRA say that it could be up to 3/4 of farms that will be affected, whereas the Treasury says it's closer to 22%. That's a very interesting counter brief between the two departments. Yesterday, this was spoken about widely, and it was cross-party. We spoke to Liberal Democrats. Actually, you can hear Tim Farron here now.
What happens at the moment is that when inheritance tax comes upon an estate, the best way to do it very often is to sort of flog off bits of it. So who do you flog it off to? Well, increasingly, it's to private equity, it's to big corporates. And so what you see is a scrubbing out of family farming from the countryside across the whole of the country. But it also means that you're just putting more and more of British land into the hands of people who are not going to farm it, will hold on to it because it's got value for offsetting and what have you. And it's miserable for those families, but it's also really stupid because it undermines Britain's ability to feed itself.
And then we also spoke to Nigel Farage, and this is what he had to say.
Well, here we are. It's Farmer v Starmer today, isn't it? And it's quite strong. You know, this happened under Blair. Over 400,000 people marched on the countryside march. That was to do with hunting specifically. But Blair didn't need to worry about that. The Labour government today needs to worry about this just because of the sheer number of seats that it's got in rural areas. And I think these people feel not just on IHT. They feel when it comes to rewilding, when it comes to nitrates policy, when it comes to, solar farms, it feels like their way of life is under attack, and they're asking why. And frankly, there is no good reason.
Is it anti-British?
What the government are doing? Well, I'll tell you something really interesting. All over the world, people say about our country, what amazing countryside you've got, what a beautiful landscape you've got. That's because of these families who in many cases have been doing it for hundreds of years for very little money by modern standards, and they should be supported, not attacked.
Now, in both of those instances, there is this confusion about how much and who will have to pay. Torsten Bell, who is New Labour MP intake, but he used to be the chief exec of the Resolution Foundation, he was lambasting the BBC this morning for claiming that farms worth over £1 million would have to pay inheritance tax, and he was saying that was total rubbish and inherently not true. So I went on gov.uk, and I can confirm that actually if you have a farm that's worth over £1 million and you are single, it will affect you. So Judith, the farmer that I visited in Peterborough on Monday, will be affected. So everything that she told me in the next clip is true.
We have never been in the black since I got married. So 1989 to now, we have never been in the black. So we live on borrowed money. And I'm not going to tell you how much money we currently borrow. It is obscene, but our assets cover our borrowings, so we feel safe. The inheritance tax may mean that I'm the last generation farmer. It may completely dispel any sort of hope that my children have of carrying on.
So then it just means it's over?
It could well be over. And my son said, Mum, do you realise that you may be the last generation farmer? If he doesn't come home and we don't carry on, or we're not able to carry on, or even encouraged to carry on and feel valuable, I will be the last generation of farmers. When I can go back, I am a 5th generation farmer on my side, and my husband's side was the 4th generation farmer. And we have made sacrifices. We haven't gone out. We haven't had expensive holidays. We have reinvested and been frugal and speculated to get to where we are now. So it's not without sacrifices, which many other small businesses are the same, but they don't have the capital investment needed to be able to work like we do.
The unfortunate part of this campaign, the farmers do have a fair point, right? If they have to sell off part of their farm, a lot of them are asset rich and cash poor. If they have to sell off part of their farm, they won't be able to pass it on to their children, because say they sell off a field, that field might have a load of straw in it. That means that they now can't feed their cows anymore. The entire farm does become unviable if you break it up into assets. It becomes like a BlackRock project. But unfortunately, there are poster boys like Jeremy Clarkson, who were there yesterday, who do use the system for avoiding inheritance tax. He actually told the Times in 2021 that was the entire reason that he bought the land. And then this was him here yesterday talking to the BBC, attempting to defend that.
So it's not about you, it's not about your farm and the fact that you bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax? Classic BBC there. Classic. Oh yeah. It's not the fact that I bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax. The fact.
You told the Sunday Times in 2021 that's why you bought it.
These people.
Sorry?
BBC. Okay, let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
I wanted a shoot. Okay? That's even worse to the BBC. I wanted a shoot, which comes with the benefit of not having to pay inheritance tax. Now I do. But people like me will simply put it in a trust. And so long as I live for 7 years, that's fine. And as my daughter said, you will live for 7 years. You might be in a deep freeze at the end of it, but you will live for 7 years. But it's incredibly time-consuming to have to do that. And why should all these people have to do that? Why should they?
So one of the reasons Rachel Reeves says she brought this in is to stop wealthy people using it as a way
No,
of
that was the
avoiding-
only reason she did.
Well,
Why
no, the other reason was to raise money for public services.
And then there was also just one more, Andrew Lloyd Webber, another fantastic poster boy, who infamously actually flew back from America in 2015 to vote in the House of Lords to push through the government's new austerity measures.
Well, I farm about just under 5,000 acres myself, but I'm not here because of me or anything like that. I'm here to support the small farmers. I mean, they are the absolute salt of the earth. They're the people who really keep our countryside going. I am a passionate, lover of the countryside. In my way, I've done what I can with my farm, which we've farmed now for 40 years, quietly. We don't bang the drum about that. But I'm here to really entirely for the small farmers, not for myself.
Just to say, Jeremy Clarkson came out twice to speak. He was there filming for his new series of Clarkson's Farm. So he came out and gave a speech, and then he turned up again. And I can only posit, I've got no evidence for this, but perhaps the first take for his document.
Was the speech the same?
Pretty much similar, yeah. Maybe the first take wasn't quite what the filming crew were looking for, so he just did it again.
Wanted a different angle.
The SD card corrupted, unfortunately.
Fuck, it's bad when that happens. Yeah, look, this point about the numbers is really, really important. Like, really important, because if you take an average price per acre of arable land in the UK, which is about 10 grand, so any farm of 100 acres or more is potentially liable for this. And a great deal of farms are bigger than 100 acres. I know that on the one hand of this debate, the NFU, other pressure groups and representative bodies are saying that the government's figures are a million miles out. You talked about Clarkson. I don't know if it was the first or second version of his rally speech that he gave. He got everyone to put their hands up and take them down. And most of the people in the rally left their hands up when they were asked if this was going to affect them directly or not. So both of them can't be right. Someone's got to be wrong in this. And I don't know whether it's the Treasury, I don't know whether it's DEFRA, I don't know whether it's the NFU. But there is clearly, it's very hotly contested how many people this is going to affect.
Which is similar to what they did with winter fuel payments and also national insurance contributions. That's twice that Labour, two other examples of them putting out a policy that hasn't been impact assessed or hasn't been properly comms.
You haven't done the groundwork for it at all.
Yeah, and so it's sort of like they get ahead of themselves with this policy that should poll well, right? Something like making millionaires pay tax on their farms. Yes, absolutely, you should do that if you're squirreling money away into land. But if you're a small family farm who's probably running, it's worth about £2 million, but you might be earning, and you're going to think I'm exaggerating, 30 grand a year on that farm.
Less than.
Yeah. So those sort of people shouldn't be penalised.
On that, though, the argument, farmers are earning 13 grand, they're asset rich but cash poor. There's obviously people who are asset poor, cash poor, and earning 13 grand. And these farmers are in a better place than those people. The farmers do surely come under the argument is that they would come under those with the broadest shoulders.
Sure, but it depends if you buy into the argument that Britain should be producing its own food and if you care about food security. Tim Farron, who the first clip that I played you, he's there talking about Ukraine and what happened during COVID. And if the borders shut down, if you're not able to bring food into the country, where do you get it from?
The 2 points that you guys have both made there is kind of why I'm sort of ambivalent about this as a policy measure, because on the one hand, you're absolutely right. We need to raise taxes. This is a simple fact of the nature of the public finances. Some people have to pay them. I'm not necessarily opposed to farmers having less of an exemption than they have had previously, because they still have exemptions compared to other people in the country. Not least as well because I actually think it does serve a purpose in terms of freeing up land, either for house building, a more atomised, smaller regenerative, small-holding agrarian farming. But on the flip side of it, and it's the point that Ava made, is you are absolutely right. If it was just, if the thing we were talking about was some other industry that led to people being asset rich and cash poor, I would say tax them, find a way to tax them. But it is because they are farmers and the thing that they do is produce the food that we would eat. I think you have to have some kind of protection or exemption for it, because what you do is critical to the survival, in most base terms, of the country.
I think it's also really worth mentioning that the Labour policy is the sort of final straw that broke the farmers' back, because for years now there's been a slew of red tape that's been slapped on farmers that have made it very, very difficult to farm. Things like they've had to all upgrade their tractors, and buying a tractor, I mean, you're lucky if you get one for 70,000. A combine harvester is £500,000, right? There's also God, that was a really important one. What was it? Oh yeah, importing food. So all these fantastic trade deals. So if you can't see me, I've been doing inverted commas, that we've secured around the globe. Things like, you know, trade deals with Australia, the one that we wanted to get with America. Conservative MPs consistently voted to make sure that imported goods did not have to meet domestic standards. And that means that the food that you bring in, say the lamb that's now coming in from Australia, has not had to be produced at the same quality as a British lamb. That means it can be produced cheaper, even though it's flown halfway across the world, which hurts farmers. Yeah,
absolutely. It's all about welfare standards, right? Which, by the way, I'm very supportive of. I think if you are going to impose the death on an animal so that you can eat it, I think the least you can do is ensure that it has a good quality of life. And so here in the UK, we say animal welfare is important, so we impose a ton of regulation, for example, on like the provision of clean drinking water, clean. There's actually sort of by the square meter space you have to provide, for example, for cows when they're calving, things like that, to provide these animals with a decent quality of life. That's good, but because of that, it means that the cost of these British goods is more expensive. They don't have the same regulation in Australia, which it sounds almost bizarre to say. It's cheaper to ship those steaks halfway around the world and sell them in a supermarket here, because they don't have to impose the same level of animal welfare. So it's catch-22 for the farmers, right? Because they can't sell their goods; they're too expensive. Agents, supermarkets, etc., will just import it, but they can't do They can't do otherwise; it would be illegal for them to do so. So there's call it a cognitive dissonance.
And you'll remember it was Gordon Brown who wanted to protect the milk, the price of milk.
Explain that.
Brown put in a levy on milk to protect it because supermarkets were undercutting farmers. There was a point in time where farmers were essentially paying supermarkets to sell their milk.
They're not doing much better now.
I find the entire thing confusing. By the way, Alex Burkhart, who delivered that wonderful Deputy Prime Minister's questions in Ed's words, he was one of the Conservative MPs who consistently voted to lowering imported standards on food. But one thing I genuinely don't understand, I found the kind of the public the public reaction to this discussion about farming very confusing, because I get the anger at people squirreling money away. What I don't understand is, when have we been on the side of over-regulation from government and also supermarkets undercutting people who are working very hard? A lot of farmers don't even pay themselves a minimum wage.
Yeah.
I think that's really been left out of the national conversation.
Yeah, totally. Do you think the way that the consensus on the opposite side of this debate to the Labour Party, because as you said, Reform MPs, Lib Dem MPs, Tories, all coalescing around this opposition, do you think that they're doing that because it's politically convenient and they believe that this is a cause that's going to hurt the Labour Party? Or do you actually think that there is consensus across all of those parties when it comes to this issue?
I think that Reform and Liberal Democrats actually do care. And I think that's because, but the Tories have always, look at what they did with Brexit. They've pillaged farmers for years, and the red tape that I've laid out. But a lot of Labour MPs are going to be in a hell of a lot of trouble at the locals because they're representing rural constituencies now, and the farmers are going to be furious. I think that I got really, I was watching Victoria Atkins yesterday. She's now Shadow DEFRA, isn't she?
In her Union Jack.
Her Union jacket. Blazer.
Union jacket, sorry. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Union jacket, yeah.
No matching trousers.
She came out and she did a little speech before scurrying away back into Parliament, which, by the way, Nigel Farage didn't do. He stayed out for all 8 hours of that protest.
And that's why he's the man.
Yeah. Anyway, everything that she was fighting against yesterday, everything that she was arguing against was disingenuous because she had been at the helm of introducing all the red tape in the first place.
Is that not just the problem that the Conservatives have in general, though, in opposing this Labour government? Is it just, it's like a snake eating its tail? It just goes back to, we're trying to fix what you did, ultimately.